In this episode of The Tripod.
I mean, talking to a camera is really uncomfortable. That I've always found difficult. And I much prefer talking to a room full of real people.
Welcome to The Tripod.
Our guest today is a photographer, filmmaker and writer based out of the UK. He's best known for his insightful and deep-thinking YouTube videos that not only allow us into his creative world, but also provide us with the tools and skills to improve as a photographer, particularly in the genres of street and portraiture. He also has a best-selling series of photography books now in its fourth collection. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sean Tucker. Sean, how are we doing?
Yeah, thanks. I'm good, man. Thank you. It's always weird listening to intros, man. I feel like it feels like I'm much. Who's that guy?
Yeah. That's what I was thinking cool. when I was writing that. I was like, "Is this too much?" And I was like, "No, this is it. Like, it's all the truth. It's all the truth." Yeah. So it is. How you doing?
Gosh, yeah, I'm all right. Thank you. Yeah, hanging in. How are you guys?
Yeah, very good. Yeah. Life is getting somewhat back to normal in Ireland now. Thank goodness.
So you're opening up again.
Yes. Pubs are open, good. Shops are open, all the good things. You know, nice. So
it feels like an eternity. It just feels like the whole last 14, 16 months just been like a blur. You know?
Madness.
Yeah. Strange times. But you're kind of opening up over there now, aren't you? You're kind of well and truly opened up, or?
Yeah, we're getting there. I think middle of this month we were supposed to be fully open, but it looks like they're putting the brakes on slightly because there's been a bit of an uptick in things, which I think was always going to happen when they open stuff up anyway.
Of course.
I'm not overly concerned. It's still very low numbers. And by the looks of it, vaccines are doing what they're supposed to do, which is really encouraging. So
yeah, of course.
Yeah,
it is. So it's a strange time, but look, we're getting on with it and getting on with our photography, and that's the main thing. We're all trying to do our best. So look, Sean, unless someone's been living under a rock, and for the tiny percentage of listeners who may not know who you are, can you tell us who is Sean Tucker?
I don't feel as fancy as your intro, but I guess I've been working as a photographer for professionally maybe 15 years now, something like that. So dipped in and out of a lot of things. I started doing food photography and product photography, and then sort of went down that rabbit hole for a good, I would say, 8 years working for different companies. Picked up portrait photography. Sort of became a first love for me that I kind of ran on the side of the product photography stuff. But to be very honest, never really made any money out of that. Never worked out how to crack making that what I could pay the bills with. But I absolutely loved it for myself. Yeah, and then picked up street photography as well halfway along, and sort of jumped into that. Although it's arguable as to whether what I do and throw up on Instagram is street photography, really, in the truest sense. But it's just wherever I happen to be, those are the photographs I take. That's the stuff I share.
Yeah.
And then, about 5 years ago, jumped in and started a YouTube channel, which is about photography. And there are sort of a fair number of photography tutorials on there. But I'm more interested in trying to make films that encourage anybody who makes anything, really. I've got a lot of people who follow along who've never touched a camera, but they do something else, and they sort of find value in the videos that talk more generally about why we make things, whatever that happens to be. So in the mix of all those things, and I'm lucky enough that I don't really need to work for companies the way that I used to. I can kind of keep things ticking over, just making those things for myself now, which is a really big privilege. But yeah, that's where I am today.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it there, Sean, when you mentioned about you're not technically a dedicated photography channel. I think that's what has so much appeal for me, especially. Like you're probably the only YouTuber that I'll sit down and watch someone just sitting on a couch talking to a camera for 30 minutes. You know what I mean? And stay totally engaged because you offer insights not only into photography but the kind of creative process. Like, and is that something you always kind of set out to do when you started out your channel?
Well, my channel had a bit of a false start at the beginning because in 2015, I think beginning of 2015, January, I thought, well, let me try put something out on YouTube. And because at the time I was shooting products and large products like sofas and dining sets for companies, that kind of thing, when I went online to look, how do you do that? Like we all jump on YouTube to work out how to do something. You agree to the job, and then you jump on YouTube quickly going like, how the hell do I do this thing I've just agreed to do?
Yeah.
I couldn't find videos on that. There was lots of videos on sort of tabletop product photography, but there was nothing about how do you light a big sofa that maybe is like shiny black leather with chrome legs, and you've got like a load of reflections to control, and you've got to work with a ridiculous dynamic range from highlights to deep shadows in black leather, and you're probably going to need 5 or 6 lights like that. Well, there was nothing to show me how to do that. So I thought, let me maybe throw up some videos that sort of fill that gap. And I posted those, I think, January 2015. And they did all right. They got passed around because it filled that little niche. But I didn't really care about those videos. So I abandoned the channel. Like lots of people have a story where they start a channel and then they just go, nah, I'm not feeling it. And then they walk away. I mean, I think everyone does it around New Year's. By February, they're like, well, this is a waste of time.
Yeah.
And then I think it was the middle of 2016 where I took myself off to Snowdonia in Wales and did just a very honest video. I kind of went there, but I wasn't really sure I was going to shoot a video. It was just a 4 or 5 day break. And I knew I wanted to try landscape photography. It's not something I do or knew how to do, but I thought it'd be fun to try it. And it was a complete antidote to the day job, which was like a very, very sort of technical production line of photography for the product. This was just throwing myself in the deep end and seeing if I could swim. And so I made a little video alongside that was sharing how I was feeling burnt out from the day job and was wanting to try something that I didn't know how to do to fall back in love with photography. And so I've made this little film. I had to talk myself into editing it and sort of throwing it up online because I wasn't really sure what it was. But then the response to that video was something very different. And I think people liked the fact that I wasn't talking like an expert. I was talking as somebody who's trying something and uncovering something or discovering something. There was no way I could pretend to be a landscape photography expert because I definitely wasn't. I was awful. Yeah. But you were coming along with me while I messed up and learned something about photography and about myself. And to me, that felt like what I used to do in the church, because in my 20s, I was a pastor or priest, whatever you want to call it, in South Africa. And speaking to people on Sunday nights and inspiring them and being honest and vulnerable about my doubts as well and about where I wasn't sure about things was something I loved to do. So it felt like it came full circle in this video back to what I used to do. And that was an instant click for me. It's like, well, doing the straight ahead tutorials a year ago, that really didn't click. But this feels right. Like I can share my journey a little bit. I can be honest about where I'm unsure or where things aren't really working out. And if I stay that honest, this feels like something I could do off into the future.
Amazing. And Sean, like obviously you just touched on it there. You previously were a priest. Like how does one go from being a priest to a photographer? Curious about that.
By getting fired from the church.
That's one way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, because I mean, at the end, I was fired a couple of times from different churches because I was saying things they weren't happy with. The last church I worked for, I was just given an ultimatum: you either stop saying this stuff or you're out. And I said, well, you're going to have to kick me out then because I'm gone. I especially in South Africa, I talked a lot about what I felt was our hypocrisy as an institution, where we claim to care about poor people in our community, but built bigger walls to keep them out, and wouldn't let me bring the homeless people we were dealing with during the week to help them out to services on the Sunday because they might mess up the furniture. And they put up spikes outside the front door to keep people from sheltering in the rain under the porch. And I just started talking about the stuff on the Sunday from the stage, and was told, yeah, shut up, you're out. So I'm like, well, I'm out then. So, I'm grateful that I wasn't stoned in the car park as a liberal heretic, but it was definitely time to move on. So, I mean, a friend of mine said to me, I had been doing a bit of photography work, but mostly video work actually on the side of church, because they obviously didn't pay very well and I needed to pay the rent. So he said, well, the good thing is you could choose whatever you want now. I'd sunk 10 years, all of my 20s, from basically, I started working with the church when I was 18, actually. So 12 years of my life, 18 to 30 years old, was spent with the church trying to get good at this thing. And I've gotten myself to the place where I couldn't last. There's no ways I could just go to another church and hope it would be different. I worked for 7 churches all in all, and been fired from 2 for saying this stuff. So it was time to get out. And this friend said to me, well, you can choose. The good part about it is you can choose whatever you want now. So seeing as you have to start with scratch, no matter what you choose next, why not choose something you love? And that's why I thought, well, could I dare to dream that maybe I could make money with a camera in hand? And that's where I sort of began with that. And it didn't start well. I mean, the first 3 years was wedding tables, going back to wedding tables, because that's how I paid my rent for 3 years, and just doing little bits of photography work on the side for that time, because I was crap. I wasn't very good yet. You know, I'd done a bit, but there's no ways I was good enough to have a queue of clients out the door.
Yeah.
So even though I dreamt that, you know, I just hit the ground running and everything would be brilliant from day one, of course, that's not how it's going to work. So I paid the bills other ways and just slowly built up skill sets and slowly got a better reputation and started to land jobs, but it took a good amount of time. Yeah.
Brilliant. And do you think, Sean, that obviously being a priest, you're standing up in front of your congregation, like, do you think that kind of allowed you to bring, you know, because videoing yourself on YouTube does take some, you know, it takes a lot of, you know, because it can be scary, it can be daunting. Like, do you think that helped you in your, you know, process over to YouTube?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's the way I write a script for a video is how I used to write a sermon. Honestly, it's very transferable. I mean, talking to a camera is really uncomfortable. That I've always found difficult, and I much prefer talking to a room full of real people. And that's because you can read people and you can play off them and you can work out what's landing with them and what's not. You can adjust in the moment. Like talking to a box in a room on your own and hoping it lands with people is still very difficult and very uncomfortable. But the way I prepare what I'm going to say is exactly the same. It's exactly the same. So, and I suppose even the way that I talk to a box in a room on my own, you know, the communication skills or how to tell a story or it's all, I mean, we used to have homiletics classes in seminary, which was just, you know, it's basically preaching class. How do you talk to a room full of people? And those classes were hard because you would have, if it was your turn that week, I would have to stand up and I would have to give a 45-minute message, and then we go for a break for 10 minutes. Then we come back in, and for the second 45 minutes, the rest of the class would shred what you just did. You know, you hold your hands weird, you stand funny, you told that story, I didn't really believe it. You rushed that part, you were too slow on that part, the structure didn't make sense. Everything they could think of to pull you apart on. And in that second 45 minutes, I couldn't say anything back. You had to only listen. So you can't justify yourself. You can't go, yeah, but you don't get it. This is what I was doing. You just have to listen and take in that feedback without saying a word, because that's what people will go away thinking after they've listened to you give a message, and most of them won't tell you. So you just have to listen to everything and absorb it. So I mean and I was terrified of speaking in public when I started in seminary. So it was those kind of 4 years that taught me definitely how to communicate better. And I absolutely lean on all that stuff still now, running a YouTube channel for sure.
Yeah. That's amazing. That sounds ruthless, by the way. Like,
yeah, it does. Yeah, like in a very cutthroat way. Like it probably builds character, but at the same time, it's quite extreme. Like, you know, just not being able to justify yourself and someone basically tearing what you just said to pieces. Like, I mean, 45 minutes. I mean, to be able to, you must have had some structure to be able to give a sermon for 45 minutes and keep. And I suppose you had to have a flow. Like, it couldn't have just been this disjointed message. You had to try and have this coherent message throughout the whole 45 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I structure. I mean, this is the thing: is like there's often little formulas we hide away in things that are just good communication. It doesn't matter where in the world you are or who you're talking to, and you know, there are things like, funny enough, there are things that actually have mirrors in photography as well. So you've got the rule of odds in photography. You've got the rule of 3. You've got rule of thirds. Like there's a rule of 3 in communication as well. You know, I mean, you give people 5 points to remember, they won't really remember them. Give them 4, and there's a weird kind of even thing where you kind of start splitting stuff down the middle. Give them 2, it's not really enough. Give them 1 thing where you only told me 1 thing. Give them 3, and it makes sense. I mean, comedians do exactly the same thing. You'll often find they'll tag punchlines with a list of 3 things, 1 and 2, and they'll hit you with the joke on the 3rd. So all these kind of things that work across the world, like those things are definitely help you in communication. So I would often start a message, and I do this on YouTube still, is I will start with some kind of introduction. I'll tell you, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say. I'm going to just set up a question, and then I'm going to answer it in 3 different ways. And each one of those I'm going to tag with some kind of story somewhere. And then at the end, I'm going to tell you what I said. So it's, tell you what I'm going to say it in 3 different ways that make it rich enough, and then tell you what I just said and wish you well as you go on your way. And I use that structure all the time still. And that's like, obviously with the church, the extra element would be, I would give you those 3 points. I tag it with a scripture somewhere because, if you're not using the Bible, you're a heretic. So I tag it with a little bit of a verse or something. And then I tell you a story around it to drive it home. And then I give you something there. So by the time you've done all that, 45 minutes is actually, sometimes it's not a lot of time, depending on how you choose to communicate,
Yeah. That's true. In a funny way, I can relate to, I'm a school teacher. So when I'm introducing a topic, I always introduce the topic first as a base, simple concept. Then I'll give them a concrete example in terms of like a real life example they might be able to relate it to. And the last part is an activity where they kind of put it into practice or something. That's kind of something we were always told, and it just makes sense now as you said it. And it's, as you say, it's a hidden rule. Like no one said the rule of 3s, but it just works. Like as you said, yeah, that's really really interesting. I want to touch on photography there for a second, Sean, in terms of composition. And I watched one of your recent videos where you were talking about thinking beyond the rules of composition. And for me, I always say this to people who ask me questions about composition, like there are rules, and then the rules can also be broken. Do you think that as beginners we're guilty of not remembering the rules but not actually understanding them? Like, like not being able to understand why this works or why something works in a composition. It's just, that's a leading line. That's good. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, I think when you're starting out, the rules are there to give you ideas when you're stuck. That's how I think about them. So, someone's just got a camera for Christmas. They're not really sure what to take photographs of, and they're just walking around. It's almost like there's just too much to choose from when you're walking around. You could take a photograph of anything, and we do. The rules are really useful when you're starting out because maybe you are walking around in a landscape, for example, and you see a leading line, but because you've read about leading lines and you know that human beings find leading lines visually interesting, you can play with that idea with your camera for a bit. Instead of like the multiplicity of choices in front of you, you're like, oh, I know that works. Let me start playing around with that a little bit. So it just sort of focuses you in on things. It's like using the rule of thirds and going, okay, I'm going to put my points of interest where those third lines intersect, or using the rule of odds and saying, well, instead of shooting this composition with 4 trees on a hillside, I'm going to crop one out and I'm going to just frame it so that there are only 3 because we like odds and things, and just using them to give you ideas, because those are, very generally speaking, things that human beings seem to like more than other things. But I think the danger comes is when we don't realize when it's time to move on from the rules. And there's a transition point where you can just slavishly follow those rules for the rest of your days and limit yourself as a photographer because you feel like doing anything differently or bending or breaking the rules or doing something more visually brave is, you're just afraid to get out of that comfort zone or be criticized. But it's those photographers who we respect because they're doing something more interesting than the formula. So I reckon that the rules are like training wheels on a bike when you start out. But you want to get beyond them. When you're comfortable with those rules, it's time to move again. It's time to try new things. It's time to try your own ideas. So they have their place, but I think you outgrow it, and you need to recognize when you outgrow it.
So I suppose the understanding comes when you can begin to know when to apply these rules and when you can go beyond the rules for a certain scene or a certain composition to make it work. Like. And
I still use the rules,
of course.
I walk into scenes and, I might have been shooting for a long time now, but I still walk into scenes and I'm like, there's a photograph here, but I just have no idea what it is, So as I move around, I'll go like, all right, well, let me just use the rule of thirds while I'm walking around because I don't know what I'm doing in this space. And that helps me arrive at something. And I might take something that sticks to the rule of thirds and go, oh, that's it. I've got it. That was it. Or I might go, there's the rule of thirds shot in this space. but there's more. And then but it's led me closer to it by starting with that rule. And then I go, okay, let me try something a bit braver. No, that's it,
Yes.
So it can still help me today. There's never a point where you go, oh, the rules are relevant.
Yeah.
But there are definitely points on your journey where you need to start transcending the rules more often and being a bit more brave.
And you mentioned in that video as well, I found it really interesting, you mentioned the kind of 4 pleasing elements: the brightest area, the area most saturation, the area most contrast, and human faces. And you did touch on that these could actually be a negative or distraction in the same way that they could be a plus in the video, in terms of like probably not, I wouldn't say maybe not the human face side, but like particularly in landscape photography, the brightest area, like that could be a blown out highlight that's just going to draw the viewer's eye totally away. So I think that's an important point to note as well, that they could also be used in a negative way, or it could be a distraction like for the image.
It's just predicting how human beings see and what we're drawn to, I mean, and then being deliberate about where we place those elements in our frame. So if I know that people always look at the brightest thing in the image first, generally speaking, when they take in an image, if the brightest thing in the image is not my intended subject, that might be a mistake. It might be a mistake. But if my subject is in that brightest part of the image, or in a bright part of the image, I'm drawing my viewer's eye to what I want them to look at, what I want them to spend time with. I mean, there's an example this morning. I went for a walk in the woods behind the house here, and I just had my little pocket Ricoh with me, and there was a bit of a sad scene, but there was a dead fox cub lying in the path, and it was in this patch of light. So it's not a photograph that I'm going to share with the world. I just feel a bit sad about it, but I straight away realized, because I'll take that shot anyway, because how could you not? It's a really sweet, sad scene.
Yeah.
And the reason that shot works is because that fox cub was positioned in this little shaft of light, and the background behind it was sort of darker under the trees. So if I chose to share that shot with the world, then it easily points my subject to the subject of the image, the viewer to the subject of the image. But if that fox cub had been in the darker shadows behind, and the path in front of it was bright, people would spend time, they'd notice it eventually, I'm sure they'd see it, but they'd spend more time looking at what the light was doing on the path, and that would have been a mistake in terms of the image. So it's just making sure, if I can control, the saturated colors, the contrasty areas of the image and the light, then and use those to direct the viewer's eye through the image, I'm being a more kind of deliberate photographer.
Yeah,
absolutely. So Sean, like, my favorite video of yours is the personal portrait projects.
Cool.
I love that. It's just beautiful from start to finish, and obviously the shots that you produced are exquisite. For a full-time professional photographers listening, how important do you think it is for photographers to take on personal projects like that? I mean, like, let's say if there's a full-time product photographer listening, I mean, you may enjoy doing it and the work involved is fun and interesting, but it is very important to maintain the passion. I mean, how strongly do you feel about that?
I mean, I don't think I'd be prescriptive with people. I mean, for me, it's very important personally, because that's where I try ideas. That's where I try and say things that are important to me with a camera. I mean, when I was shooting products, I'm trying to sell, furniture to rich people. I mean, for me, that's not a noble goal or something I care about. I couldn't care less. But like the video you're talking about, going back and taking portraits of 3 mentors of mine who mean a great deal to me, that means a lot to me. And it means that I can combine the skill set that I built up for myself with a camera with a message that I actually care about, and then hopefully share it with the world in a film that talks about the fact that these men helped me at a point in my life where I didn't have a dad, and they were able to help me grow up as a man, and how it might be our responsibility to turn around and do that for other people. I managed to do that because I took a skill set I had with the camera and tell a particular story. So for me, it's what it's all about. I mean, but I also know photographers who don't really care about photography that way, and I wouldn't judge them because they don't. I mean, it is what you want it to be. Maybe they tell stories, or maybe they find their meaning in other sorts of creativity, or other sorts of work, and that's absolutely fine as well. I mean, I know some product photographers who they consider their photography that they do in the day for products just to be, they're like plumbers, I've got a wrench, I'm going to go fix a job for a client. That's how they think about their photography.
Yeah.
And they don't really pursue photography projects personally on the side. Instead, they write, and that's their creative outlet where they want to say what they want to say. I don't judge people for doing that, but I would always challenge photographers, if you care about the medium as personal expression, like as a form of communication, because you already have that skill set. And yeah, I mean, I think the personal projects are where you're going to uncover the good stuff. You're going to work out how to speak with images instead of just produce something that's sellable.
Absolutely.
Telling a story almost, like, yeah.
Yeah.
You're sharing yourself. I mean, that's the beauty of it. That's exactly what it is.
You said you mentioned the word prescriptive there. That's very interesting, because obviously everyone's going to interpret photography differently, and everyone's going to have their own different creative outlets, as you said. But like, in its simplest form, for you, obviously, is photography all about telling a story?
Not for me personally. I want it to be that, but I mean, I also know that to say that that's what photography is, which is what a lot of people like to do, photography is storytelling, isn't fair, because I know that there are a lot of photographers who, I did a film beginning of last year, just before all this lockdown stuff hit, with a guy named Martin Rotz, who is a photographer from the Netherlands, who does these amazing, he walks around with a kind of 100 to 400 mil lens around the streets, and he'll find like where kind of light will hit a wall, and there's maybe two colors of walls, and it's creating some very, very abstract, kind of interesting shapes. And I mean, he puts out this amazing zine called March and Rock. Wow. I know you can't hear on the podcast, but I'm just showing the guys on video some of the stuff that he does. It's very, very abstract. They're like abstract paintings almost.
Yeah.
And, he's not telling a story. This isn't storytelling, but it's beautiful, beautiful work. And I think to say that photography is only storytelling might discredit or discourage people like that, who are just like, it's just the visuals. It's just like, how arresting can I make this just purely visually? I'm not telling a story. I'm not trying to say anything particularly. I'm not trying to be, political or tell personal stories. This is just about the visuals. That's also completely valid. Yes. But yeah, for me personally, I want to be a storyteller with images in the long run. And I'm always trying to work out how to do that better. But it is a personal choice. And I would never make anyone else who goes down a different avenue feel bad, or like they're doing something less than me. Because there's so many genres you could dip into. Like, I mean, landscape photography, is it really storytelling? I mean, it could be, but does it have to be? No, I don't think it has to be. I think it could just be giving us a sense of space and the natural world. I mean, you could argue it's storytelling. I don't think every landscape image I see is tells a story. It just puts me in a place I want to be, and that's absolutely valid for what it is. You have to make it what you care about, I think.
Yeah. Yes. I think it's also in the viewer, like how they interpret that image. So they might interpret it as telling a story. You know what I mean? Like, they could see, I don't know, let's say a sapling in a woodland, and like that sapling could be like struggling or something like that. That could be their interpretation of it. But as you said, it can be quite difficult to tell a story with landscapes. I think a lot of it is just, as you said, capturing space, capturing scale, atmosphere, drama, all these different things, And that kind of leads me on to something I wanted to ask you. It's kind of, we done a podcast on this, and it's around the term style. And style is it was a really interesting podcast because it caused a lot of controversy. We kind of were saying, like, because people are asking us, like, should I chase down this certain style, and should I pursue a certain style in my photography? Me personally, like, I would say no, just shoot what makes you happy and shoot, and you kind of eventually kind of find your own path. Would you kind of resonate with that, or do you kind of, obviously you've developed your own style now in terms of your street work, and a lot of your subjects are kind of bathed in nice light. You use lines, shapes, you use shadow an awful lot. That's kind of obviously your style, for want of a better word, even though you mightn't want to be called a style. Do you know?
I mean, I think both are true. This is why it's controversial, because I think
Yeah.
it is true that you should photograph whatever you want to photograph. I think that's absolutely true. But it's also true that, let me be really specific about it, I think, because we're talking sort of about consistency with our images as well, aren't we?
Yes,
We're sort of saying,
correct.
do our images have like a visual flavor to them that runs through it all? And I think that might not be important to you, but where it's important and you can't get away from it is either if you want to try and get work as a photographer, or if you want to gain a following around your photography. Then having some consistency in a style is incredibly helpful, because and the example I always use is if you want to get into wedding photography and you set up a website to specifically go after wedding work, and you put up on your website, you put photos of your holiday and also the lunch you had, and also your dog and your family and a couple of weddings and then some landscapes and then some cars at a car show. Like if someone is Googling around for wedding photographers and they find your website because you say you're a wedding photographer, if they start flicking through your images, they're going somewhere else very quickly, even if the wedding photos are good, because someone else, when they go to their website and they say, this person has a distinct style that I like as a wedding photographer, and they only post wedding photography. I'm sure they take other sorts of photographs, but they're declaring, I care so much about this, and you can trust me with this work. Here it is, bang. That will get more work than the website with a bit of everything. That's just how. And before you go like, well, that sucks that it is that way, you all think the same. I think like that. If I want a specialist for something, I'm going to go find that person who posts that work only, because I know they're a specialist and they know their stuff. If you want to build a following, it's the same. If you see on Instagram, for example, if you're flicking through Instagram, you see an image that you like, you'll probably like tap a like button on that. You go like, actually, I like that image so much, I want to see what else they do. And then you click on that little tag and you go through to their page. But if you go through to their page and you see, oh, this is a once-off, they don't normally do this. They do a bunch of other stuff, and here's the dog, and here's the lunch, and here's the everything else. You're not going to hit subscribe or follow. You're going to move on, because they only do it every now and again. It's not regular. But if you go through to their page and you see, oh, they do this regularly, this thing that I responded to and I really liked, that this is their style, then you'll hit follow. That's how we are as psychology. That's how our human minds work. So if you either want to make money from your photography or you want to build a following, yes, I think consistency in building some kind of style is important. Now, where people get mixed up is they go, oh yeah, but if I have a style, then I can't shoot what I want anymore. No one said that. No one said that. You should absolutely still take photographs that are outside of your style and that are experimental. You should do that all the time. The question is where and when you share that stuff. Because if you're not experimenting, you'll get stuck in the style. Like, I'm kind of known for a style that I think I'm moving beyond. In fact, every time I post images to my Instagram that aren't in that style particularly, and people end up saying it all the time, oh, this is different to your normal stuff. It's like, if you take a look, the last few months have been different to my normal stuff. And that's a choice, because I don't care what your expectations are. I have to keep growing and developing as a photographer. So I need to keep shooting different things and growing beyond the trick that I discovered a little while ago of like, shooting a high contrast diagonal slice of light on a wall. Like, I have to transcend that. I have to, or I'm going to get bored with my own stuff. So it's both. It's got to be both. If you are getting locked into a style, I think it's a mistake. But sharing a particularly consistent style with the world, if you're trying to either get a following or get working, is a good idea. Yeah. But it should always be both and, keeping both running concurrently.
So I was actually like that. Like my Instagram page was all concerts. I went back and archived everything from when I started shooting gigs. But obviously I haven't had a gig in 15 months now at this stage. So
touchy subject.
I just I share everything on my Instagram at the moment, but I do it because I want to. It's not for the following or for to make money or whatever. So and once gigs come back and everything's back in the flow of things, they'll be all archived again. It'll just be a nice gig portfolio again. But I definitely agree with what you said.
I mean, with my Instagram particularly, I've never deleted an image on my Instagram. So there are, over 2,500 images there from the last 10 years. It's a mess, but I don't have the goal of trying to get a following on Instagram. So I don't necessarily recommend people do what I do. All my following on Instagram is because they came over from YouTube, not because they found an incredible photographer. And personally, I don't care what people expect on there. But if I didn't have a following and I was trying to get a following, I'm doing it wrong, I think. I wouldn't suggest, if that was your goal, that you do it the same way as me. But I use my Instagram like a teaching tool. I talk about it in my videos. I say, I post everything from start to finish, and there is some proper shite on there, like from quite a way back. And it all stays there because I think you can scroll all the way back and you can look through and see how I've slowly developed. I like seeing how I've slowly developed. So I keep it there for that particular purpose. Yeah. But if I was trying to get working with that Instagram, I'd be making a big mistake of it. So it depends what your goal is.
Yeah. I'm the same. I haven't deleted anything. Like in the bottom of my grid is like horrendous selective coloring, and it was just, it's brutal. But as you said, it's great to scroll down there and say, wow, like, so at least we're doing something right here. But I can really resonate with what you said in terms of, like, it's almost like you reach this plateau. It's like if you're working out, like, and you lift the same weights for a year, you have to up the weight at some stage because you're not going to improve, or you're not going to get any stronger. So it's the same in your photography and your creativity. You have to try and expand a bit more, and in that way, then I suppose it opens up new doors in terms of could be a different genre, could be new skills, and then you're just growing and growing as a photographer. Like, like, it's probably too broad to say a style is an actual genre, because like within landscapes you could have so many different styles, within street you could have so many different styles, so it's a very interesting term. It creates a lot of discussion amongst our listeners and amongst everyone that we talk to it about.
It's also messy because I think it's been really interesting now, because in the last 3 months I've moved out of London and up to Yorkshire, which is obviously a very different part of the country. But I still, if you can say that I have a style, the content, the subject matter of what I'm shooting is different now, because the world I live in, the part of the world I live in is different.
Yes.
But there are parts of my quote unquote style that I take with me because I still expose in a particular way. I still like shadows. I still play with shadows. So I might be in a woodland playing with shadows, and I'm not on a hard edge, hard line, it's kind of city center. But so there's pieces I take with, and there's pieces that I leave behind. And it's not neat. It's not cut and dry. It's like X and Y is my style, and that's all I'll ever shoot. There's things I like doing now that I will take into new contexts, and I'll do that. But then I'm also going to learn new things in the context. So I might even start to drop some of the ways I expose or compose and try new things, and that might develop something new. It's kind of really fluid. I think we get very cut and dry with it. We try and draw lines, but we have to hold it a little looser, I think. Hold lightly, hold tightly, let go lightly, kind of thing. You don't grip it. This is what defines me. Because if you do that, you stop growing. It's keep experimenting and take the stuff that works with you. I mean, there's a spiritual author who I really enjoy. Actually, Ken Wilber came up with this thing. He's the one who talks about transcend and include. Like, when we grow as human beings, we are transcending whatever stage we're at. We're moving beyond it, but we're also including everything that we've learned in the previous stage. So that's how I think about growing in photography style as well, is that I'm hopefully outgrowing the tricks that I'm learning, or the things that I know that please an audience online, because who cares? But I'm still taking the stuff I'm learning in that and including it in the next thing. And hopefully it just gets richer and richer as you keep transcending stages and including everything you've learned before. You're not transcending a stage and abandoning everything that came before. You're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's just an increasing enriching of your work, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
And Sean, are there any genres of photography that you'd like to dabble into a little bit more that maybe you haven't done so in the past?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I've been lucky enough that I've got to try a lot, over I'd love to try wildlife, I think, but not because of the not because of the photography challenge, but just because of, I think, the kind of what it means to shoot wildlife, that you have to be outdoors and very patient and being very present. I think it would be a nice challenge. I mean, in my when I first went to university years ago, I actually enrolled in a degree in wildlife sciences that I failed my exams spectacularly in the first 6 months because it was maths and chemistry and a bunch of other stuff that I was terrible at. Because as a teenager, all I wanted to do was rehabilitate big cats back into the wild.
Really?
In South Africa. Yeah. So, I mean, I even went and spent a month on a game farm, like working with orphan lion cubs and leopard cubs. And that's all I wanted to do. I read books by Gareth Patterson and George Adamson, Mark and Delia Owens, all these people who've done it. And then that dream kind of got cut short when I went to university, just because I couldn't really hack it with that degree. But yeah, maybe to come full circle at some stage and go back out with that love of animals.
Yeah.
And be able to sort of photograph the natural world like that would be a really cool challenge, I think. Yeah.
That would be class. That would be deadly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's kind of the process of wildlife photography. The patience is phenomenal. You know, like there's a lot of very good wildlife photographers here in Ireland, and like they'd be talking about, for one image, like you could be just waiting for days almost. Because you have to get to know, like the true hardcore wildlife photographers have to get to know the patterns of the animal, like, do you know what I mean? The patterns of what they're going to do throughout the day and where they're going to be in a certain place. And yeah, it really is. It's something that I'd love to get into as well. It's really very cool, interesting genre of photography. So Sean, your series of books, you have your collection series that they're called. They've been extremely popular. What made you kind of want to start releasing those photography books in the first place?
I mean, initially I wanted to, it was for me at the start, because I wanted to have like these little time capsules of what I saw in any given year. And I think printing your work like that is always it's always a nice thing to do. You know, I mean, even if you just go on Blurb and you throw in your favorite images from a particular year, print yourself one coffee table book and just have it on the shelf. Do that once a year is a great thing to have. They become these like, just these little pockets of time where you can go back and flick through and you can see not only where did you go and what did you see, but also where was your photography at and how is it changing over time. So that's why I started. But yeah, I mean, there was an audience for it. So because I built a bit of an audience on YouTube, it meant that I could also sell it to people who were interested. And I mean, it's just grown a little bit every year and keeps going. And it's a great way to pay the bills. It's, you know, I think in my head, I often go like, oh, you know, I'm still not a real photographer. I've got a long way to go. But then I kind of look back and I go, but I am selling a book of my own photography every year. And that's real, right? That's like genuine. And it's just, I need to stop thinking about them as so disposable, because actually the more I do them, the more I realize like, no, this is valuable. This is really valuable, not just for me, but also for people who follow it along and sort of look through, and they can see that progression and they can compare their own images to those images. And I think it's something that I almost started not realizing how meaningful that would be to me. That's becoming more meaningful over time, which is cool, because the next one I do will be the 5th year of those. And that's a cool thing to have. If I do that for the next 10, 20 years, you know, you've got like this massive stack of these annual books, and I put 90 images in each book, which is quite a lot for an annual book, you know?
Absolutely.
And I'm enjoying it more and more, and I'm looking forward and being more deliberate about shooting for them every year. It gives me a good target as well, because you know, sometimes you feel like, oh, you know, do I feel like going out and shooting today? Not really. And then I go, no, this is my job. I sell a book of photography every year. Get off your ass, get out the door and go and do some work. But and it motivates me to go out and see new things and take more images, because the more images I take in a year, the more I have to choose from, which means the book is stronger for that following year. So the challenge is really exciting as well, you know.
Correct. You touched on something very interesting there. Do you think as photographers we're very guilty of devaluing our own work or being our own worst critics?
I mean, I am, and I'm sure it's true for everybody. Like, you know, you always look at everyone else's work and go, oh, they're amazing. Well, that person's brilliant. I wish I could take images like that.
Correct.
And you ignore it when people say that about your own work. You know, you've got people telling you that. You've always got, oh no, they just don't understand, or they're just a beginner, they're crap, they don't understand that my work's rubbish. I mean, if you've got my personality, I think you have to be like, you have to remind yourself, like, you've made progress, you know, that you used to be a lot worse than you are now. And that's because of hundreds of hours of taking photographs, and you are getting better all the time. And that, I mean, I know what my problem is. I am a perfectionist, and I'm always looking up the ladder, you know, at who I'm not as good as. And there's obviously a lot of those people, you know, and I've got a bookshelf like full of amazing work from amazing photographers who I'm not a shadow of them. I've got a long, long way to go. But then that's all I look at. So I go like, well, there's all these brilliant photographers, then there's me. Instead of going, there's all these brilliant photographers, then there's me. Then there's a lot of other people who are coming up the ladder behind me. So I've made a lot of progress, and I have to keep reminding myself that. And even though there's a long way to go, there's a lot to celebrate. And that's important, to celebrate your wins, to celebrate when you take good images that you like. And remember that you know, even though there's a road ahead of you, you've got to celebrate the progress. You know?
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Just out of curiosity, Sean, who would be a couple of the photographers that you would look up to or admire?
Oh, there's lots. I mean, someone for me at the moment who's just become quite a big benchmark for me is Joel Meyerowitz. And not specific. I mean, Joel is known for his, you know, New York Fifth Avenue street photography in the 80s. Mostly, I think that's where most people would think of images of his. But I've got a book on my bookshelf now called Where I Find Myself. And it's a great book of his because it shows you that that's a tiny portion of his journey, those images that we know him for. And then there's, you know, photographs of 8x10 portraits he did down by the coast in the States. And there's still life photographs of pewter jugs on his farmhouse table in Tuscany. And then there's quite abstract landscape photographs. And then there's self-portraits that he did during lockdown. And he does everything, and you can't nail him down. And even though his work is, you know, I like some of it, I don't like other, well, no, I don't like, I don't get some of the other stuff. But to me, as a photographer, he's an impressive person because he will never, like you're talking about with style, he will never get locked down. He doesn't really care about the expectations of people. He's got to the stage where he doesn't need to worry about a following or about getting work. He can now just create for himself wherever he wants to and be led wherever he wants to. And that's something I want to protect for myself going forward. I always want to be trying something new and moving forward. So he's a big one for me. Steve McCurry has long been a portrait photographer I look up to. Don McCullen is someone who I've maybe not as much his photography, but as a human being and as a person, I've always found really inspiring. Peter Lindbergh, he was a fashion, he passed away a couple of years ago, but as a fashion photographer was really interesting to me. And I've never shot fashion particularly, but if I ever was going to, that's the style I'd like to shoot it in, because it was a lot of black and white and quite gritty and quite earthy, which is the sort of portraits I like to shoot. He's a really good one for me. Salgado is obviously huge for me as well, just in terms of storytelling and like gritty storytelling and being brave enough to go and tell stories about refugees or about workers in horrendous conditions around the globe, that you know, deliberately saying stuff about the things that he cares about with his cameras is always a challenge to me about where I think personally I should be going, because that's something I'd like to do, is to talk about important things with a camera. It's a personal choice. I'm not saying everyone needs to do that, but for me, he's one of those people who pushes and inspires me to do that one day.
Yeah. Like that's going to be your creative outlet, to talk about the things you want to talk about. Other people might write, and other people will take photographs. Some people, you make films as well, so you have the double skill there as well. Sean, this has been an absolutely fantastic chat. Now, before we let you go, we always have a quick fire round with our guests, and it often turns into not so quick fire round if we go down rabbit holes with the questions, but they're set up to be short enough, so it shouldn't take too long. Quick fire round. Question 1: what camera accessory can you not leave home without, if there is one?
At the moment, it's the Ricoh GR3 for me because it's a camera that I stick in my pocket and go everywhere with. So
okay.
90% of the stuff I post to Instagram is shot with that little pocket camera.
Okay, interesting.
Nice.
Tell us a bit more about those cameras. What, like, how do they, in terms of what's their sensor, or
It's an
they're obviously
APS-C
tiny.
sensor.
Okay.
And it's a fixed 18 mil lens on it, which is a 28 mil equivalent in full frame terms. So, and 28 mil is wider than I like to shoot out and about. I'm more of a 35 mil guy, but it's teaching me how to compose because I've got more in the frame. So you have to work a bit harder. So that camera's taught me a lot. Razor sharp images out of it. Absolutely razor sharp. And my workflow with it is I just really like the fact that I can have my little Ricoh GR in a pocket, and then I can have my phone in another pocket. I can take photographs and sit down at a coffee shop, and I Wi-Fi the images over to my phone, and I sit on Lightroom Mobile and just give each one a quick edit in 30 seconds and kick it out onto the internet. That being able to shoot, edit, post all on the go from two things in my pocket is a workflow I find really freeing.
I love that, I actually love that you've just said that. Like, that's because everyone, or a lot of people, can get like so obsessed with over processing, and just the fact that you just do everything just sitting in a coffee shop is admirable and beautiful.
Everything I've got on Instagram, almost everything is 30 seconds in Lightroom on my phone, and I've done big prints in galleries for exhibitions off those images. And it's nothing wrong with them. I feel like if I had to edit them more than that, it's probably not a good image anyway when I'm doing that kind of photography. I mean, if I do a portrait, I might spend 45 minutes on it. But if I'm just out and about on the street, if I need to do 45 minutes, I messed up for me personally. 30 seconds, throw a border on it, chuck it on.
I'm a fan of a border myself. I do it as well.
I just don't like Instagram screwing with my crops or like adding new crops because it messes with your composition. It's the only reason I do it. Just to keep the aspect ratio.
And the fact you spend such little time on the image, it speaks volumes in terms of it's all about the composition. That's where it's at. Like it's not the edit, it's the composition. I think that's a very important takeaway for that question. So question 2, I think you kind of answered this already, but if you were to use one lens for the rest of your life, what would it be? Would you say the 35 mil? You kind of answered that already, but
no, actually, I think because portraits are so important to me, it would be the 50 mil. Because I shoot all my portraits now and have done for a few years only on 50 mil. So every portrait I take is 50 mil. And I also, 50 mil as a focal length is still versatile enough that I could go out and do everything I want outdoors as well. But it would give me the ability to do everything, really. So,
Amazing. I did like the fact that when you were speaking about your portraits, like you use the 50 mil rather than the 85 to get, closer to your subject and make it more intimate and meaningful. Like that. That's lovely.
I used to be an 85 guy, but I just found, you know what actually the truth is of that as well. It was a very practical thing because for a lot of the time when I was in London, I would do actors' headshots as well. And they would come over to my flat. So I'd try to set up a studio in my flat, but the room wasn't very big. So to get far enough away from them with 85 mil, I was backed up against the window. And one day I thought, this is dumb. Like you're standing at the other end of the lounge, backed up against this window, like almost falling out the second story. Let me just switch to a 50 mil and get a bit closer. And then I liked the intimacy of that a bit more. I'm slightly closer to the conversations better while I was shooting. And I just stuck with it. And I think it was a trip I did to Namibia where I took portraits with the Himba tribe a few years ago. And I wanted more of the context in those portraits as well. And I know that if you just shallow the depth of field on an 85 mil, it just becomes blurred. You can't really see what's in the back. It's just color and texture. But I wanted you to see the huts and the thatch on the huts that they live on and the red mud that they smear on the huts and some of that detail. So 50 mil gave me a little bit more of the context. And then from then, I've just, those two reasons, having that intimacy with the subject. And if I'm shooting something environmental, getting a bit more of the context. That's kind of why I landed there. Yeah,
deadly. Question 3, back button focus, Sean, yes or no?
No, not for me. No, I don't. I mean, it's fine, but I don't. I'm trying to think. On the Ricoh, I actually there's a touch function on the screen, so I can literally tap where I want to focus. So I'm holding the camera with the one hand and just tapping focus where I want it and shooting like that often. On the Sonys, the full frame cameras I use for the more professional stuff, the eye detect and face detect for portraits is so good that forget about it. I don't need to be holding back button focus. And if subjects are moving forwards and backwards, it has to be able to track in real time anyway. So there's no point in grabbing and holding. So I've learned to trust that. Back in the day, I didn't even do it though. I think like when I was shooting on the Canon 5Ds, I would often center focus recompose with the shutter button. And that's just how I started. And I think I just stuck with it. I just didn't bother to learn another way to do it. But now with autofocus being so good, there's just no reason to mess around or fiddle around with that. I can trust the system.
Absolutely.
Trust the system is right. Favorite camera brand, Sean? Do you have one?
I don't really care. It doesn't matter. I mean, I've used Canon. I love the Canon cameras. I switched to Sony because I needed cameras that would do double duty with stills and video. Yep. And at the time, they were absolutely far and away the best value for money in terms of functionality and the rest of it. So the Sonys I love for that. I absolutely love the little Ricoh cameras for the very specific thing they do for me. They're brilliant. I've shot with the Fuji cameras. I've really enjoyed those. I mean, I'm a big believer that if I'm a good photographer, it shouldn't matter what camera you stick in my hand. I should be able to take good images with it. So I'm very brand agnostic. I don't care. And I don't think we should care very much. I think we should just, take what we've got. And this is the thing is, all these camera companies these days, they're all making brilliant cameras. Yep. Yeah. Try find weak cameras out there. You go like, oh, I can't really do my job on that particular camera, can't you? Because I'm pretty sure I could. I'm pretty sure I could take it as long as I've got the right lens on the front of it, the right focal length. I'm pretty sure I could get the job done. And I think that's what we should be pushing ourselves to do all the time is, regardless of the label on it. It's a light-proof box with a bit of glass on front. Get on with it,
Yeah, there's a tool at the end of the day.
So true.
Yeah. Get the right tool in your hand, but I think the label that tool has, if I need a full frame and a 50mm, I've got lots of options and I can make them all work. And actually, by the time I've put my little edit on it in terms of color and contrast, you won't be able to tell what I used.
No
way.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, correct. Last question, clarity, yes or no?
Just a little tickle, just a little like
everyone says the same thing.
A little 5 out of 100, maybe. Just it's you know what? Because what clarity does is gives you that little bit of edge contrast. So it's not sort of global contrast. It's just where you got transitions between shades or details. It's just going to tighten that up a touch for you. But I mean, it's obviously the minute you start pushing it over 20, you're going to start to get odd haloing and artifacting. So just a little touch,
Brilliant.
Perfect.
Brilliant.
And then question 6, which we haven't included on our scripts. That's why Sean can't see
it. There is no question 6, Kevin.
RAW or JPEG?
Again, like I don't think it matters. I mean, let me rephrase that. So for portraits, always RAW, because I want to protect that dynamic range and keep as much as possible. But when I'm out and about taking photographs, I shoot RAW these days. And flick those across to my phone and edit them because it does help to have the dynamic range. But I don't think that's essential. When I shot on the Fujis, I would shoot JPEG because the JPEGs are really good. I don't need a lot of dynamic range because the way I shoot in particular, I want to lose the shadow detail. I'm deliberately crunching that contrast. The reason I'd use a RAW file is because I want to save a ton of dynamic range. But I never shoot like that because I want less dynamic range almost. I want to embrace the contrast to get that exposure in camera. And I liked a couple of those little simulations. I think I used to use the classic chrome all the time on the Fujis. I like the color in that from scratch. And I would approach it like, well, shooting with this JPEG is like loading a roll of my favorite film back in the day. That it has that contrast, it has that color look baked in. I'm going to make it work and just make sure I expose it and get it right in camera. And, I can remember of the thousands of images I took on the X100 or the little XT20, thousands and thousands of images. There were maybe 3 times I regretted that choice. And I'm like, I need a little bit more dynamic range. It just never happened, So I don't think, it depends how you shoot. I will always shoot RAW for professional stuff because I want the safeguard of that extra dynamic range and detail. But it depends what you do. Really.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing. No one
Yeah.
has ever kind of
It's a great answer.
everyone
Yeah.
just says raw. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
that's
that
a
is
great answer.
it's perfect. That is an
Mm.
absolutely fantastic answer. So thank you very much, Sean.
Yeah, phenomenal.
No
Sean,
worries.
that was an unbelievable chat. I'm a massive fan of your work and your insights on YouTube, and just be able to sit down here and chat to you. It's been really special. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, man. That's
Has,
very
it's
kind.
been-
It's been fun, man.
fantastic.
Yeah,
I couldn't think of a
yeah.
better way to spend a Sunday afternoon. So really
Absolutely.
appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, Sean. Thanks very much for coming on the podcast. We appreciate it.
Welcome.
Mind yourself. Take care.
Cool, man.